Montana Territory, 1883. The wind howled through the cottonwoods lining the edge of the small town of Willow Creek as Hazel Zeller stepped out of the sheriff's office, her worn boots scraping against the frozen dirt. The paper in her hand trembled not from the cold, but from the final blow it carried. The last of her late husband's debts had been tallied and delivered. She owed over $3,000. Every acre of land, every mule, even the rocking chair her daughter used to sit in gone. Hazel stood still for a moment, staring at the town she had lived in for 8 years. Her caramel-brown hair was tucked beneath a faded wool shawl, and her hands were red from the cold. She was 24 and already a widow. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead for 2 months. Consumption took him slow. The debts he left behind came fast. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the humiliation. Watching the bank take her home, the neighbors pretending not to stare as she packed what little she could carry. And the way the general storekeeper stopped offering her credit the moment Thomas's coffin hit the ground. She glanced down at the 6-year-old boy clinging to her skirt, cheeks flushed from the wind. "Come on, Rowan," she whispered. "We have to go." Rowan looked up, big brown eyes full of questions he didn't know how to ask. His little sister, Ruthie, barely 4, was bundled in a worn blanket Hazel carried in her arms. The 3 of them had nowhere left to go. They walked down Main Street slowly, past the saloon, past the blacksmith's. A few folks watched from behind frosted windows. No one opened their doors, and then he rode in. The horse was jet black, hooves pounding against the dirt like thunder. The rider sat tall in the saddle, his coat dusted with snow, a rifle strapped to his back. Hazel glanced up, ready to move out of the way, but the cowboy slowed as he reached them. He dismounted with a quiet ease, boots crunching underfoot as he approached. He was younger than she expected, maybe 26 or 27, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with eyes the color of river stone. "You Hazel Zeller?" he asked. She tensed. "Who's asking?" "Holden Nash," he said, tipping his hat. "Your husband owed me money." "I came to collect." Her heart dropped. "We have nothing left. You will not get a cent from me." He looked down at her son, then at the bundle in her arms. "I am not here for money. I came to see if he had any good in his family. Turns out he did." She stared at him, confused. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag and handed it to her. "This clears the debt, all of it, paid in full." Hazel blinked at it. What is this?" "I bought the note from the bank," Holden said. "Paid every cent." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you deserve better than being left in the mud by a man who could not carry his own weight." Hazel's hands trembled as she clutched the paper. "You do not even know me." He stepped closer, voice calm. "I know enough. I saw you once, years back, when I came through with cattle. You were planting flowers outside your porch. Thought to myself, I never saw anyone look that kind in a place this cold." She swallowed, unsure what to say. Holden adjusted the bandana around his neck. "I do not expect you to trust me, but I have a place about 20 miles west. It is warm, safe. You and your young ones could use that right now." Hazel's jaw clenched. "I do not take charity." "Good," he said. "Because I am not offering that. I am offering a start if you want it." She looked down at Rowan, who was shivering, then at Ruthie, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "Just for a while," she said hesitantly. Holden nodded. "Just for a while." They rode out of Willow Creek that same afternoon, Hazel in the saddle, holding Ruthie in front of her while Rowan rode with Holden. The boy clung tight to the cowboy's coat, small fingers wrapped around leather. The snow fell light as they crossed the plains. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, turning the world gold. They reached Holden's ranch by nightfall, a modest cabin tucked against a hill, smoke curling from the chimney, a corral out back, and a barn that smelled of hay and horses. He had built it all himself. Inside, the fire was already going. The warmth soaked into Hazel's skin as she stepped through the door. Holden brought in their small bags, then left them alone to settle. She looked around: wood walls, a table, 2 chairs, a bed tucked behind a curtain. Simple, clean, safe. That night, she curled up on a straw mattress beside her children, listening to the wind howl outside. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. The next morning, Hazel found Holden already outside, splitting wood. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold. "You do not have to work so early," she said, stepping onto the porch. He paused, wiped his brow. "I have always worked early. There is something honest about the morning." She watched him for a moment. "Why did you really pay that debt?" He looked at her, quiet for a moment. "Because I saw you being left behind, and I have been there. No one should stand in the cold alone." Hazel's chest tightened. She looked down, unsure what to say. He stepped closer, careful. "I am not asking for anything, Hazel, but if, in time, you see something in me worth holding on to, I would ask for your heart." She stared at him, startled by the honesty in his voice. "I do not know if I have a heart left," she whispered. "Then let me help you find it," he said, and for the first time in a long while Hazel smiled. Just a little, but it was real. The morning sun spilled slowly over the valley, lighting the frost-laced grass with a faint silver shimmer. Hazel stood at the edge of the corral. Ruthie balanced on her hip, her breath rising in soft clouds. Rowan chased a bantam hen across the yard, his laugh a small, clear sound in the quiet. Holden had already saddled his mare and was checking the gate latch, his gloved hands steady, movements practiced. Hazel watched him in silence for a while, Ruthie's head resting on her shoulder, the child still half asleep. She didn't know what to do with the calm pressing around them. It felt fragile, like it might dissolve the moment she dared to believe in it. "You always keep chickens?" she asked, her voice low. Holden looked over his shoulder. "Started with 3. Coyotes took 1. That little red hen's the boss now. Keeps the others in line." She nearly pecked Rowan's fingers off. "She don't like being chased." Hazel gave a tired exhale that wasn't quite a laugh. Ruthie shifted and blinked up at her, then reached out toward Holden without a word. He stepped close, holding out a hand. "May I?" Hazel hesitated, then nodded. Ruthie went into his arms without fuss. He held the child against his side like he'd done it 100 times, no awkwardness, just a quiet ease. Ruthie tucked her face into his coat. "She's usually wary of strangers," Hazel said. "She's got good judgment," Holden replied, voice soft. Hazel studied the way he held her daughter, steady and unhurried. "You have kin?" she asked. "Had a brother. Drowned in the Milk River 5 winters back, no one else since." "What happened to your folks?" He glanced toward the hills. "Father died in Kansas. Fever. Mama followed the next spring. I came north after that, needed sky." Hazel leaned on the fence rail. "I never had much. 1 sister. She went east to marry a man with a factory. We wrote for a while, then she stopped answering." Holden didn't press. Just nodded and shifted Ruthie gently to his other arm. "You built this place alone?" Hazel asked. "Took 4 years. Bought the land off a trapper. Was nothing but brush and a creek." "Why here?" "Because no one told me not to." That drew a small smile from her, despite herself. He met her eyes. "You and the children can stay as long as you need, but I don't want you to feel beholden." "I already do," she said, honest. "Then let me earn it a different way." Hazel turned away, not because she didn't want to look at him, but because it felt too close to something she didn't know how to carry yet. Later that day, while Holden hauled feed to the barn, Hazel scrubbed the cabin floor on her knees, Ruthie napping nearby on a folded quilt and Rowan stacking kindling by the hearth. The boards were scuffed and worn, but they came clean under her hands. She opened the window to let the scent of pine in, and watched as a doe stepped out from the brush to drink at the creek. At dusk, Holden came in with a rabbit slung over his shoulder. He hung his coat and set the game on the table, then noticed the swept hearth, the neatly folded blankets, the polished iron pot warming on the stove. "You did all this?" he asked. "I needed to do something." "I don't sit still well. It's your home, too." Hazel stilled, her hand tightening around the wooden spoon she was using to stir the stew. "That's a kind thing to say." "It's not kindness. It's truth." He sat across from her, his elbows on the table, watching her without pressing. "Just quiet, present. You don't talk more than you have to," she said. "No good ever came of filling the air just to hear your own voice." She nodded. "Thomas used to talk all the time, big plans, big schemes. None of them ever came to pass." Holden didn't ask more. Just looked at her like he saw the pieces she was still trying to hold together. That night, Hazel tucked the children into the bed behind the curtain and stepped outside. The stars were sharp and clear, and the night air bit at her skin. She crossed her arms and leaned against the porch post, letting the stillness settle into her bones. Holden joined her a few minutes later, bringing a second cup of coffee in his hand. "They asleep?" he asked. She took the cup and nodded. "Hard day, they're not used to quiet." "You are," he said. "I don't know if I am anymore." He leaned beside her, arms folded, eyes on the sky. "I think quiet's not the same as loneliness." "No," she said. "It's not." They stood side by side, the porch boards creaking faintly under their boots. After a moment, she said, "You said once you've been left behind too." He took a long sip of his coffee. "I have." "What did you do with it?" "Built something no one could take." Hazel looked out over the dark hills. "Maybe I'll do the same." "You already are." She didn't answer. But when she turned to go inside, she left the door open behind her so he could follow. The creek thawed in patches by the second week of March, its banks softening under the sun's slow coaxing. Hazel knelt by its edge with her skirts hitched above her boots, sleeves rolled, scrubbing a shirt against the washboard Holden had lent her. The water stung her knuckles, but she worked steady, breath calm, movements efficient. Ruthie sat nearby on a flat rock, braiding grass into loops, and Rowan wandered farther up the bank, poking at driftwood with a stick. Holden was hammering fence posts along the eastern boundary, his figure framed by the pale sky. Hazel could hear the rhythm of his work carry down the slope, sharp, clean strikes, unhurried. "Rowan," she said without turning, "keep out of the water." "I ain't in it," he called back. "You're about to be." She wrung out the shirt and leaned back, letting the sun touch her face. It had been days since snow fell, and the warmth was beginning to stay longer after morning. Ruthie handed her the finished braid of grass. "For the table," she said. Hazel smiled, her fingers brushing her daughter's cheek. "It'll look just right." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Hazel found Holden on the porch oiling the hinges of the lantern bracket. The wind had died down, and the quiet was deeper than usual. No wolves, no owls, just the hiss of the fire inside and the soft rasp of cloth on tin. "I think I'll try planting root vegetables next week," Hazel said, stepping into the lamplight. Holden looked sideways at her. "Soil's near ready. I'll show you where it stays damp longest. I'd like that." He set the cloth down and straightened. "You ever kept a garden before?" "Only herbs." "Nothing that fed us much. You'll learn quick." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You ever think about leaving this place?" He rested his hand on the porch rail. "Once, maybe. Before I had reason to stay." Hazel looked at him fully, the lines at the corner of his eyes, the way his brow softened when he was thinking. "I'd ask you something, if I may," she said. "Go on. You ever been in love?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "Once. Long time ago. She married someone else." "Did it break you?" He shook his head slowly. No, but it taught me not to offer my heart lightly. Hazel's hands tightened around the braid of grass Ruthie had made. And yet you offered it to me. I did. And I meant every word. She looked down at her boots. I think I forgot how to be wanted. He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. I don't want what's left of you, Hazel. I want all that you are becoming. Her eyes stung, but she blinked it back. You sure you're not just saying what you think I need to hear? I don't offer words I don't intend to keep. She held his hand then, not tightly, not for long, just enough to say she heard him. The next morning, Hazel rose before the children, tied her hair back in a knot, and stepped outside with Holden's hat in her hand. He was chopping kindling near the barn, and she walked toward him without hesitation. You forgot this, she said, offering it to him. He took it, their fingers brushing again. Thank you. I'd like to help with the fence today, she said, if you'll show me how. Holden studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'd be glad to. She worked beside him until noon, swinging the sledge when he steadied the posts, her hands blistered but stubborn. They didn't talk much, just exchanged glances and small nods of understanding. After, he poured her a tin cup of cold water and handed her a cloth for her palms. I won't be much use tomorrow, she said, flexing her sore hands. You're more use than you know. That night, Holden brought out a carved wooden box from under his bed. Inside were small things: a broken compass, a rusted spur, a faded photograph of two boys sitting on a wagon tongue, one of them Holden, younger, leaner, but unmistakably him. He handed the photograph to Hazel. That was my brother. I haven't shown this to anyone since he passed. She held it carefully, her thumb at the edge. You look like you carried the weight of the world even then. I reckon I did. She set it back in the box. You don't have to carry mine alone now. He didn't speak, just looked at her like he'd been waiting to hear that. She reached out and touched his arm, steady and sure. We'll build something, Holden, not just a house or a fence, something we both belong to. He nodded once. I believe that. And when she leaned in and he met her there, it was not hurried or claimed. It was quiet, deep, and true, as if the land beneath them had waited through every season just for this moment to bloom. Hazel sat at the small pine table as the light shifted across the floorboards, her mending basket open in front of her. Ruthie lay curled on the braided rug with a linen doll cradled in her arm, her breathing even. Rowan was outside with Holden, helping salt the last of the venison. The boy had taken to trailing the man like a shadow, asking questions in a low, earnest tone, and Holden never hurried his answers. Hazel worked the needle slowly through the tear in Rowan's shirt, the cotton softened by many washings. Her stitches were tighter now, hands steadier than they had been weeks before. She didn't rush. She let the quiet fill the room. By the time she stepped outside, the sun had fallen behind the ridge and the wind had picked up. Rowan looked up from the smokehouse, waving with one hand, the other holding a wooden pail. His cheeks were ruddy, his coat dusted with sawdust and ash. Holden stood nearby, sawing a board to repair the chicken pen. He looked toward her, one sleeve rolled to the elbow, the edge of the saw biting clean through the pine. He's asking about trapping, he said. Wants to know how to set snares. Hazel crossed her arms. You planning to teach him? Only if you say so. She glanced at her son. He needs something to put his hands to. Just keep it small. Holden nodded once and went back to his work. Later, after supper, Holden brought out a tin box from the high shelf near the hearth. Hazel, seated with her sewing again, looked up. He set the box gently on the table and opened it. Inside were slips of paper, stiff with age. Letters folded and refolded, some with smudged ink, others yellowed at the edges. These were my mother's, he said. She wrote to my father when he went west before the rest of us. He never wrote back. Hazel set her sewing aside. You kept them all this time. She never threw them away. Buried them under the floorboards when she passed. I found them when I tore down the old house. He held one out to her. She accepted it carefully, her thumb brushing the corner. The handwriting was small, deliberate. She wrote about the land. She wrote about waiting, about hoping he'd come back. He never did. Hazel folded the letter again, her voice quiet. Do you think she ever stopped loving him? I don't know, but I think she learned to stop expecting. Hazel looked up at him. You afraid I'll do the same? He didn't answer right away. I ain't afraid of you leaving. I'm afraid of you not letting yourself stay. Hazel kept her eyes on the letter in her hands. I spent years trying to hold something together that was already gone. I don't know if I remember how to build anything new. You don't have to remember, he said. You just have to begin. She stood then, moved to the window and watched the last of the light spill across the hills. The sky was a deep blue just short of night with a single star visible above the ridge. I don't think I was ever seen before, she said. Not really. I see you, Holden said. She turned back, her voice steady. I know. The next day, Holden rode out before dawn to check the trap lines. Hazel watched him saddle his gelding, Rowan already dressed and ready, clutching a coil of rope. Holden handed her the rifle before mounting. In case you need it, he said. I'll keep it close, she replied. She stood with Ruthie on the porch and watched as they disappeared into the trees. The girl clutched her shawl, still half asleep. Think they'll bring back anything? Hazel asked. Maybe a fox, Ruthie murmured. Hazel smiled faintly. I hope not. That afternoon, Hazel took down the muslin curtain behind the bed and began sewing a second one. She'd found extra cloth in the bottom of Holden's chest, stiff with disuse. She didn't ask, just used what was there, her stitches clean and sure. By dusk, the riders returned. Rowan's voice carried ahead of them, eager, full of pride. We saw a bobcat's prints. Real big, Mama. And Holden let me set the snare myself. Hazel helped him down, brushing the dirt from his coat. Did you catch anything? Not yet. But we left 2 traps set. We'll check them again in the morning. Holden dismounted and tied the reins to the post. He's got a good eye. Hazel nodded. He's never had a man to teach him. Holden met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. That night, after the children were asleep, Hazel stepped outside. The stars were thick overhead, the air sharp but still. Holden joined her a moment later, carrying a tin cup of hot water, steam curling upward. There's a calm in you, she said, but I know it came from fire. He looked out over the valley. It did. I think I want to stay, she said. Not just in this house. In this life. He turned toward her, his voice low. Then it's yours. Hazel reached for his hand. She didn't tremble this time. Let's start something that holds. We already have. She leaned into him then, her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her back. No promises. No grand declarations, just warmth and weight, and the quiet certainty of something real taking root. Hazel stood in the barn doorway, lantern in hand, watching the wind stir the hay scattered across the packed dirt floor. The horses were already fed, their soft chewing the only sound in the stillness. Rowan had fallen asleep curled next to Ruthie on the quilt near the hearth, worn out from helping Holden clean the snares they'd brought back empty that day, but Rowan didn't mind. He'd said it felt like knowing the land, even if it hadn't given anything up yet. Holden was kneeling near the tack wall, adjusting a cinch strap with quiet focus. He didn't look up at first. You don't rest much, Hazel said. He rose slowly, brushing his hands on his trousers. Leather cracked again. I'll have to rework the stitching. She stepped inside, setting the lantern on a beam hook. You always have something that needs mending. He gave a nod. That's the way of things. Everything worth keeping needs tending. Hazel watched him a moment, then reached for the saddle blanket folded nearby. She ran her hand across its rough weave. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked, voice steady. Holden's eyes lifted to meet hers. "Not until you," she nodded once, as if confirming something inside herself. "I don't want to be someone's burden." "You're not." "I was once." He stepped closer, slow and solid. "You're not a burden, Hazel. You're the strongest thing I've ever seen." She looked up at him then, the air between them full of something quiet and certain. "If I said yes, if I truly meant it, would you be ready for all of it? The hard days, the grief that still wakes me from sleep, the way I flinch when the door bangs too loud." "I'd be ready," he said. "I already am." Her throat tightened. "Then ask me." He took her hands in his, rough palm to rough palm. "Hazel Zeller, would you let me walk beside you for the rest of our days? Not to fix what came before, but to build what comes next." Her mouth trembled as she smiled. "Yes, Holden Nash. I would." They stood there under the dim barn light, the smell of hay and horse and wood smoke around them, and he kissed her not like he was claiming her, but like he was promising to stay. She leaned into it, her hands at his collar, the quiet weight of her yes settling into the bones of the place. They married that spring, plain and simple, with Rowan holding Ruthie's hand and the preacher from Three Pines riding out to speak the words. Hazel wore her mother's shawl, the one she'd kept folded at the bottom of her trunk, and Holden wore the same shirt he'd worn the day they met. He'd trimmed his beard and she'd braided her hair. The vows were short, but neither forgot them. Afterward, they shared bread and stew with the neighbors who came, 4 families from over the ridge and 3 trappers who'd known Holden before the ranch was built. Ruthie fell asleep on Hazel's lap halfway through the meal, and Rowan stood taller than he ever had, his chest puffed with pride when Holden called him "my boy" to the preacher. The days that followed found rhythm. Hazel planted potatoes and onions behind the cabin, and taught Rowan to read from the primer Holden had traded for with pelts. Ruthie learned to feed the chickens without scattering grain everywhere, and Holden built a second bed so the children wouldn't have to crowd together through summer's heat. When the rains came, Hazel patched the roof herself while Holden held the ladder. They didn't argue, didn't raise voices, just worked side by side, each trusting the other to carry half the weight. One night in July, Hazel sat on the porch with her feet in Holden's lap, the stars thick above them, the air still and warm. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. He rubbed a thumb along her ankle. "You are. I never thought love could be this quiet. It's the only kind I ever wanted." And when they kissed, there was no urgency, no hunger, just the long, slow knowing that they had survived the worst and found their way to something lasting. By the time the first frost came, Hazel was sewing a second quilt with Ruthie's help and teaching her letters with charcoal on scrap wood. Rowan had started carving small animals from leftover fence posts. Holden watched it all with that same steady gaze, always close, always listening. They didn't speak of the past often. It didn't need to be named. It had shaped them, but it did not own them. The day Hazel found out there would be another child, she told Holden with her hands wrapped around his, her voice steady and certain. He didn't speak right away, just leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "Thank you." They raised their family in that valley, on land that held their laughter and their labor. Hazel's garden grew fuller each season, and Holden built a smokehouse twice the size of the first. They added a window to the cabin, then another, until the place let in so much light that even winter felt gentle. They grew older together and stronger. And when Rowan rode off years later to start a life of his own, he looked back once from the ridge and tipped his hat. Hazel waved, her other hand resting on Holden's shoulder. Ruthie stood beside them, grown into a young woman with her mother's sharp eyes and her father's quiet strength. Inside, the hearth was still warm, The walls still held every word, every silence, every soft promise that had passed between them, and Hazel knew without fear or doubt that she had built something that would hold, that she had given and been given a love that would never leave, not in this life, nor in anything that came after.